How do everybody? I know I've not posted a non-computer games related video for a few days, but I've not found anything that I've really wanted to talk about. But this is a story that I think is going to interest most people who are regular viewers here and people who may be new viewers as well. As per usual, I will link the article down below. Read it yourself. Obviously, I believe what I'm going to be saying is right. I've not read this article fully yet. I've just had a quick skim through it. But you don't necessarily have to take my point of view on it, make up your own mind. Anyway, let's get on with the article, and here we go. So, record immigration has failed to raise living standards in Britain, economists find. With a population surging is masking exceptionally bad productivity since 2008. Well, that is absolutely no surprise, I think, to most people who understand that water is wet and dogs do in fact bark. That mass immigration has been catastrophic for the British economy. And yes, productivity has been terrible since 2008. That, for those who are of the younger side of the viewing figures, may not know that in 2007 there was a global financial crash which was caused by what are known as subprime mortgages, and that effectively means mortgages that are worth more than the value of the house. So people were taking out loans for the properties. Generally, they needed 100% of the money for the house itself, and then it was to cover the cost of like legal fees and things like that, and sometimes even for doing renovation work and stuff on the house. But then you have like up to a mortgage of like 120% of the value of the house. And then what happened was people started losing their jobs, and then the banks were repossessing these houses, but they couldn't get the money back, even when they were selling the house, because they lent out more money than what the house was actually worth. It was scandalous, really, absolutely scandalous. Now that was allowed to happen, and the fact that the bankers who were involved in that weren't actually executed for the damage that they caused to the global economy, it's unbelievable. And I do think that we are still living in the shadow of that even today. Not solely, there's other problems that are going on, but I do think that is another part of the puzzle as to what's wrong with the world at the moment. Anyway, record immigration has failed to make Britons richer and is masking a crisis in productivity. A leading think tank has warned. Well, this is the problem that we have in the UK, is that we don't actually have a productivity problem. We actually have a problem with over-taxation, so that makes it look like we have lower productivity per person. But also, because of mass migration, companies aren't investing in technologies. So whereas countries like, say, France, Germany, America, and even when you go to places like Japan and South Korea, what they're doing is they are investing in industry and in technology. So yes, they may have, like Japan may have an aging population, but what they have is a highly automated, highly mechanized industry over there. So they do not need the workforce that we need here. Simply being, our companies over here have got lazy and have got reliant on cheap labour. And I remember during Brexit as well, the Bank of England, and I distinctly remember Mark Carney, who was the Canadian head of the Bank of England. I believe he'd been the head of the Canadian bank as well, central bank. He actually went on TV and said, if we vote for Brexit, 500,000 jobs will be lost overnight. And he also stated as well that mass migration does not suppress wages. Well, guess what they admitted once the country voted Brexit? He admitted that both of those things were lies. He admitted that mass migration does in fact stagnate wages, specifically lower end wages. But now the NHS are even starting to see it now. We've seen all these doctors striking over wages. But why should we pay doctors more when we can just bring a Nigerian doctor over who'll work for half the price? Like genuinely, that's a serious question. I'm not even trying to be like snarky with that. Like, why should we pay doctors more money when we get a foreign doctor in who'll work for less? But also, 500,000 jobs weren't lost overnight as well. Like, literally the next day, 500,000 jobs didn't disappear, which is what the Bank of England specifically said would happen if we vote. Never mind the implementation of Brexit. He wasn't on about the implementation of Brexit, by the way. He was on about the vote itself. He said the day after the vote, if we voted for Brexit, 500,000 jobs gone, like that. So all of this stuff about mass migration and all of this stuff is highly, highly political. Very, very ideologically driven, and a lot of it is based upon sentiments and feelings and not based on any evidence whatsoever, and it's been proven time and time again. So the Resolution Foundation said the fastest population growth in a century had propped up the British economy since 2010, with 3/4 of the 6 million increases accounted for by inward migration. However, it added that Britain's middling growth record since the Tories took power has done little to boost GDP per person, which economists believe is a better proxy for living standards because it accounts for population growth. I don't think GDP per person is necessarily a great standard for measuring things by. GDP per person doesn't necessarily account for how people are doing across the whole board. It's done as an average. So you can have lots and lots of billionaires living in a country which can make the GDP per person look far better than it actually is for each individual person. So I don't necessarily agree with that as a model, and I think it's used far too much, and I think it's a very outdated model as well for that reason. Resolution Foundation analysis showed GDP per capita has grown by 4.3% over the past 16 years in total, just a fraction of the 46% increase seen in previous 16 years. Sorry, that's supposed to be 4.6, but they've missed out the decimal point. That's my apologies for that. The end of the decade-long jobs boom has also exposed the UK's exceptionally bad productivity record since the 2008 financial crisis, according to the Resolution Foundation, which is typically regarded as left-leaning and whose former chief executive, Torsten Belt, is running to be a Labour MP. It's no surprise. All of these different types of quangos like that were all set up by Tony Blair, and they were all specifically set up to keep his legacy going long after he left office. It's the same, we see these things like Ofcom as well and all these other organisations which have been set up and designed to run basically as Labour out of power and to try and siphon off power away from the government itself and to put decision-making powers within people who could be classed as activists with no oversight from government itself. And this is where the Tories have been incredibly weak as well. They've allowed these Tony Blair-created organisations to continue undermining and controlling the country. And the Tories, they're just pathetic. They really are pathetic in that how they've dealt with everything, really, and which is why they deserve 0 seats. It said average annual productivity growth of 0.4% over the last 16 years represented the slowest increase in almost 200 years, leaving the average wage more than £14,000 below its pre-crisis trend. It is, and it is partly to do with the Tories. However, let us not forget as well, and to be fair and balanced, this is a global phenomenon that we're experiencing. So this isn't just happening in the UK, it's happening currently in Germany, in France. Britain is actually growing faster than the EU at the moment as well, and all EU nations. So we can't forget that. And even America's having mass inflation as well. Their food prices have gone up something like 40%, and the fuel prices have gone up about 50% in the last 4 years. So, you know, this isn't specifically a UK thing, and there are plenty of people who will say, oh, Brexit this, Brexit that. It's nothing to do with Brexit. This is a global phenomenon. Separate analysis by the Institute for Fiscal Studies found that surging debt, interest and a ballooning benefits bill meant Rishi Sunak has presided over the biggest increases in the size of the state of any post-war Conservative government. Well, yeah, I mean, again, this comes down to mass immigration with the benefits bill. It's I believe it's over 50% of people Pakistan heritage are not in work. You know, it's completely unsustainable. You know, we've got more than half of social housing in London going to people who are not born in this country. Never mind people whose parents or grandparents are foreign born, just people themselves who weren't born in this country. You know, so we've just got this absolute Ponzi scheme of the government constantly shipping in more people, claiming it's for GDP, pushing down wages, working in the gig economy, propping up these internet companies like Deliveroo and things like that, who are allowing illegal immigrants to work in them. And it's purely about pleasing a very, very small group of very, very large companies and very wealthy people so that they can have a cheap labour force. It's like Dickensian in how it manages. And this is what this was a big cause of what led to Julius Caesar, by the way, becoming getting into power. Before Julius Caesar actually got into power, there were two brothers. I can't remember their names off the top of my head, but they were actually running to become heads of the Senate. And what they were rallying against was the use of mass slave labour in the Roman Empire, because basically the average Roman wasn't able to get work because all of the landed gentry of the time were just using slaves from the various wars, which it became a positive feedback loop, so to speak, because then you had more men who were out of work and small landholders who were then having to sell the farms. They were then joining the Roman legions. Then they had these large armies which were then having to go out and fight more wars to make use of them, which was then creating more slaves, which were then coming back, creating more of a labour disparity. And it was like this constant circle, and which eventually led to Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon. Those two, I believe, those two brothers got assassinated as well. I wish I could remember the names. Can't remember the names off the top of my head. But anyway, so this is very reminiscent of what's happened then, where you have these large companies bringing in loads of cheap labour, undermining people, which is creating more unemployment in people, creating more surplus for cheap labour. And it's just a rinse and repeat positive feedback loop. And I do believe these people are aware of what's happening and they're doing it intentionally. The IFS said the size of the state was likely to remain bigger than before the pandemic as an ageing population and geopolitical tensions pile pressure on the public purse. Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, has already committed to increasing defence spending as a share of national income from 2% to 2.5%. A policy Labour has said it shares as an aspiration. I mean, this is something else that I've said to you in the past as well, is that this increase in military spending is a sign that we are going to go to war. And all this stuff that we've been hearing about conscription and all these like the nuclear missile test tried and that failed, and hearing about there not being enough tanks to last more than 2 weeks in a full-out war with Russia. This is all signalling that we are going to war with them. So do not be surprised when it happens. Sorry about that. Just 1 second. The IFS said public spending is now forecast to be 80 billion higher in today's money by the end of the decade than pre-pandemic levels, which it said was based on unrealistic spending plans. Now, again, to be fair to Rishi Sunak, with the pandemic, and I can remember that man going on TV, when he did furlough, he did say to everybody, this is not a freebie. This is not us giving you money for free. We want this money back. You will be paying more in taxes, I believe, with the word, not word for word verbatim, but that is well within a safe parameter of what he meant. That is an accurate representation of what he said. And people are now surprised that we're paying more in tax as well. It's like, well, what do you expect? They shut down the global economy and paid everybody to stay at home. Well, not everybody. I never stayed at home. I actually carried on working throughout the pandemic, but I've still got to pay back that bill so that everybody else could have an extended summer holiday. Which I think is also gross. I think people like me who worked through the pandemic should be exempt from the higher taxes. It should be a separate tax, kind of like council tax, something like that. Pandemic tax, they should call it, and you should have to pay it back. You have to pay back your loan from the government, whether you like it or not. And then there was all the foreigners as well who took furlough and then effed off back to Europe after taking thousands and thousands of pounds. So let us also not forget that scam that went on as well. The think tank said health spending is likely to continue to rise, and after decades of cuts, so is defence spending. Without a cut in the scope of what the state does, given demographic and geopolitical pressure, an overall increase in the size of the state will be hard to avoid. No, it's not hard to avoid. That is just them trying to increase the scope of power that they have over society, and they're using it as an excuse to tighten the grip over people. And it's absolutely disgusting. And all it's going to do is make people's lives more miserable and harder, and it'll just result in more taxes. And it's these sorts of things that lead to a collapse of a civilization, where the state becomes too big. And it's really, really basic logic. This is what happens. You can see this happening with corporations as well. Corporations die because they get too big and too bureaucratic, and they become too expensive to run, and they can't achieve anything new. We're starting to see it now with Google as an example. I don't think Google will be around forever, simply because Google has got so monolithic now in how it moves. It'll end up getting broken up in order to survive, because it's just going to end up killing itself, again, because of the bureaucracy. It added that overall growth in the 2010s was largely driven by an employment boom, with the rate peaking at 76.1% before the pandemic. The think tank said this has now turned to bust, with shrinking workforce and rising inactivity owing to long-term sickness exposing the UK's poor record on productivity, which keeps prices in check and drives higher pay. But it's not just that, but it's also the fact that inflation that's going up. So you have what's called zombie companies, and they're going to the wall as well. So they were basically companies who, when interest rates were around nearly 0%, they were taking out loads and loads of loans. But they weren't necessarily very productive companies, and they were only just breaking even. And now that interest rates have gone up, a lot of these companies that have taken out these loans can't afford the repayments because they don't actually produce anything of value. And we're seeing that with like BuzzFeed News as an example has gone belly up on it. That's a great example of a zombie company. The think tank described overall UK growth since the Tories took power in 2010 as solid, if unspectacular, when compared with other rich countries, with average output of around 1.5% per year between the end of 2009 and the end of 2023. This is stronger than Germany and France, but behind the US and Canada. It also highlighted that Germany has not grown at all in this decade, with the country's weak performance likely to continue as it weans itself off cheap Russian energy. It's just mismanagement. I mean, the Germans could have avoided all of that by simply investing. They've invested billions and billions and billions into renewables, and it's now biting them in the arse. If they'd have put that money into nuclear power, they'd actually be selling. If they'd put the same amount of money into building nuclear power plants, they would now be a net exporter of energy with the surplus that they'd be creating. It's just absolute madness. And again, it's ideology overtaking rational politics. They've been speaking about for years and years about the grown-ups being in the room. The grown-ups haven't been in the room. It's student activists have been in the room. They're the people who've been in charge. People who can shout the loudest, they're just zealots, and they don't listen to actual engineers and actual people who know what they're talking about. These people are just sycophants and mad. While the International Monetary Fund has said UK growth is likely to outpace its European peers in the medium term, the Resolution Foundation noted that Britain's jobs miracle was unlikely to continue. Well, it's unlikely to continue if they continue pursuing these vanity projects like net zero and these green agendas and all that sort of rubbish. We could very, very easily become a very, very highly productive society again, just by simply investing into reasonable industries like nuclear power as an example. We only need to build a few nuclear factories, a few nuclear power plants, and a nuclear processing centre, and we could be a world leader in it very easily. Same with this. They want to build a missile launch, a space centre. Do it and invest in it, because technology around that is unbelievable. We'd end up with an amazing tech sector in the UK if they did that. Loads and loads of jobs, and as long as they train people in this country first. Stop doling out the jobs to foreigners. Stop allowing them to headhunt from abroad and actually train people in this country. Get rid of this obsession with university training. Most jobs can be trained via apprenticeships. They don't need a degree to do them. Like nurses, for an example. It's absolute madness that your nurses have to go to university. So when they start the job, they've already got £30,000 worth of debt over their heads or more, whatever it is they have. Maybe 50 grand's worth of debt. So you don't even need to give them a pay rise then. Because you get a nurse who goes through on an apprenticeship in the NHS, and they come out after the same amount of time as the university training. They don't need a pay rise because they haven't got the debt to pay back. So whatever that repayment is each month, let's say it's £70 a month. You've given them a £70 pay rise straight away, instantly, because they don't have that debt hanging over their heads. It's not hard to understand this. This isn't advanced economics. I'm hardly the brains of Britain, and I understand this basic concept. It's just stupid ideological vanity projects. That's all it is. That's all it was for Tony Blair when he brought in this 50% of people going to university. It was so he could brag to other countries, look at us, look how many of our people go to university, 50% of them. Who cares? Who cares when the value of a degree is worth next to nothing now because of it? He said the next parliament may have to do without the demographic trends that flattered GDP in the 2010s. It didn't flatter it. It flattened it, more like. Although the UK population is projected to grow by 1.8 million people over the next parliament, the number of hours worked isn't expected to rise as quickly. No, because they're allowing anyone and the dog into the country. And most people aren't coming here to work. They're coming here to get the gifts. Give me your free stuff. Give us free stuff. And that's the problem. Where we... Sorry, yeah. Isn't expected to rise quickly. As population growth is offset by a higher share of employment made up by groups who work shorter hours on average, such as women and young people, and an older workforce who are less likely to be employed in the first place. Greg Thwaites, research director of the Resolution Foundation, said the economy is at the centre of an election campaign and the UK's economic record is bang average when it comes to GDP record. But beneath this middle-of-the-pack position lies some major strengths and weaknesses that hold the key to the UK's future economic performance. Britain's middling growth, this is in quote marks this by the way, Britain's middling growth record has been propped up by a booming population. The extra 6 million people in Britain have certainly made the economy bigger, but has done little for GDP per capita. In fact, the UK's record on productivity, which is what really matters for living standards, is exceptionally bad. Therefore, what that says is massive immigration, that although it has raised GDP as a whole, per person, how it is manifesting for individual people, our lives are worse because of it. Because it hasn't raised in a comparable percentage to the amount the population has raised. There is widespread consensus on the need to turn around the UK's productivity record, which is far easier to talk about than deliver. But if the next government is looking for encouragement, it should seek to build on Britain's already booming services export, which could really go gangbusters over the coming decade. Well, maybe they should try deporting people who don't work. You know, maybe they should try that. When you've got people who live in the country and all they do is take, 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 maybe try getting rid of those first as well. You know, maybe stop allowing people in with chronic illnesses that are costing money as soon as they get off the plane and as soon as they walk into the country. Maybe try that one. You know, maybe when you find people who are running businesses off the books, you know, who are foreign and therefore avoiding paying tax, maybe get rid of them as well. You know, maybe start getting rid of foreign criminals as well once they come out of prison. You know, these are really easy things. This is like low hanging fruit, and straight away that would create billions and billions of surplus on what we're losing at the moment. Well, it may not create a surplus, but it would at least reduce the loss. You know, these are very simple things that can be done on top of the other stuff that they're talking about. Now, that's not to mention that there aren't many good people who migrate here. I'm far from that. I'm sure those people who migrate here with good intentions and do actually do a good job and pay lots of taxes, I'm sure they're just as frustrated as people like me, because it makes them look like bad people, and it makes them feel like, oh God, everybody must feel like I'm a scammer or like I'm just trying to milk the British state when I'm in fact putting money into it. And for those people, I tip my hat to you. You know, you're working hard. Fantastic, no problem with that whatsoever. I don't think any rational or reasonable person does have an issue with that. But man, these people again are just showing weakness in the thinking by not actually saying what needs to be said. And this is why the Tories and Labour are eventually going to lose, and we're going to end up potentially with some sort of nutter taking over, because they're going to turn around and say, look, all these other people aren't willing to do what needs to be done. If you don't care what I have to do, vote for me, and I'll make those tough choices on your behalf. And those people, I'm afraid, will end up winning one way or another, and I do not look forward to that day either. I'm going to be very clear on that. Anyway, if you found that interesting, insightful, useful, whatever, please do like, subscribe, and whether you agree with me or not, please do comment below as well. I love reading people's comments. I love replying to them, and I'm not a closed book. I'm willing to change my mind if your arguments are strong enough. But as I said at the beginning, please do read the story yourself. Please do make your own mind up. Could be wrong on what I'm saying. I don't think I am, otherwise I wouldn't be saying it. But like, I am not a closed book, as I always like to say. Anyway, well, I'll leave it at that. Thanks for watching the video. It's been a long one, this. But thank you very much, and goodbye.